So let's jump back into our discussion of Congress. We were talking last time about the legislative process, and we were sort of tracing the process of how a bill becomes law, but we were doing that in a little bit different context than sort of the way that most textbooks discuss that. We were identifying and counting up veto points. Remember, we said that a veto point is any point along the way in this process where a bill can be effectively vetoed. Again, to repeat the broad point that I made last time, we all know, everybody understands that the president has a constitutional veto power. Okay? It's a formal veto power, that the president can, we can go through this process. I say we, in Congress, they can go through this process and produce a bill, send it to the White House, and have the president either sign it into law or certainly the option there is for the president to veto it, in which case the bill is just dead, unless Congress overrides the veto, but those are very rare. Anyway, so we know that the president's the only actor in the process that has a formal veto power, a constitutional veto power, but hardly the only actor that has an effective veto power, the effect of vetoing legislation. So that's what we were doing last time. We were sort of tracing this process, and I don't remember exactly how far we got with this. How many veto points did we get through last time?
We just talked about
We had not gotten really beyond just this right here?
No, next to the red box.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we were talking about the different options
Yeah.
that the committee has. Okay, well, let's make quick work then, because we do need to move on. All right, so any questions about these first several? I guess we did not. What you're telling me is we really didn't get to this last one, because if we didn't talk about that, if we had talked about that, we would have also talked about the first veto point. All right.
Yeah.
So did we not get to that?
We kind of elaborated on what table actually meant. Like,
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, it just really means sort of, technically it means that they're going to, postpone consideration of this bill to a later time, but in practice what it really means is that they're just killing the bill. Okay? So that's not, in this first instance, that's probably not the most likely scenario, but it is a possibility, so we're going to have to count that as the first veto point. Okay? So we have the first veto point is the full committee with its option of tabling the bill. Okay? A much more likely scenario, though, at this point is that the bill gets referred to subcommittee. Remember last time we talked about this committee system, the structure that we have in both chambers of Congress, where we have these full standing committees organized around substantive policy areas like House Agricultural Committee, House Ways and Means Committee, House Armed Services Committee, Senate Finance Committee, Senate Foreign Relations Committee, that sort of thing. We also said that each of these full committees has a number of subcommittees attached to them. It's really just a further division of labor. So, on this, I think the example we were using last time, the hypothetical, was a farm bill, right? And something that would be introduced into the House of Representatives and referred, because it's dealing with farm policy, F-A-R-M, farm policy, it would be referred to the House Agriculture Committee, right? But once it gets to the House Agriculture Committee, the most likely thing that's going to happen is that it's going to be sent even, sort of further down the ladder, so to speak, to a subcommittee that has jurisdiction over the particular aspects of that farm legislation. Okay? So this seems like a high probability occurrence here. So what can the subcommittee do? Well, notice that it's essentially the same options that the full committee has. Although up here under the full committee it said report the House bill to the floor. Okay, here it says report House bill to the full committee. Okay? In other words, they just turn it right back around to the full committee with or without a recommendation. That's not very likely, though. They can amend the bill. They can make changes. Remember, we talked about the markup process last time. That's what they call it in the Congress, is the markup process, where they offer amendments to the bill. We also noted last time when we were talking about that process at the full committee level, we said that any amendments that are offered in the House, in the committee, the full committee or the subcommittee, have to be, what's the technical term? Does anybody remember what the technical term was that we threw out there? This is one of those, this is a course where you should probably have come into this course in late August or September, early September, whenever we started, with some expectation that you were going to learn some new vocabulary, right? I mean, I think when you take an anatomy and physiology course, for example, you probably have that expectation. Or when you take an economics course, you probably have that expectation. Or when you have, take most other college courses, you have the expectation that you're going to learn some new vocabulary. It's no different in this course, right? Here we're talking specifically about the legislative process, and they do have some very technical terms. They may sound jargonistic, but, we need to know them, right? So do you remember, does anybody remember the term that we threw out there last time? Germane, right? That any amendments, good, thank you, Joyce. Any amendments that are offered at the committee or subcommittee level here in the markup process have to be germane. Now, since you were willing to throw the term out there, can you give us a brief sort of working definition of what that means?
Any amendments which are offered, I have written like the substance in the bill that should be the original bill.
Yeah, in other words, it has to be on topic, so to speak, right? So if the original farm bill, if the original bill is farmland, it's a farm program, then any amendments have to be related not just to farm programs generally, but to that specific farm program, right? Now that's an important point, because when we get over to the Senate side, we're going to see something very different. We're going to see that over on the Senate side, they can offer non-germane amendments, okay? Which is an important political matter, okay? All right, so again, they can do these, offer amendments, and then report it out to the full committee with or without recommendations. They can hold hearings, just like we said at the full committee level. But look at this last one. They can table the legislation, right? They can just sort of put it aside, oh, I'm saying look at this, and I don't have it on the screen, sorry. Here we have this last option here is to table the bill, right? So they can just sort of set it aside and say they're going to get back to it later, but in point of fact, they don't get back to it later. Right? It's just a way to kill the bill. So we're up to veto point number 2, full committee and subcommittee. Now, assuming that the subcommittee does report it back to the full committee, then what happens? Well, the same options exist again, right, including that last one, which is to table the bill. So in other words, the full committee has a second shot at tabling the bill. Okay? So we're up to veto point number 3. Now, if you were to total up the probability of a bill being tabled by full committee or subcommittee on the House side and on the, we haven't looked at the Senate side yet, but imagine the same sort of thing happening over here on the Senate side. If you were to total up the probabilities of a bill being killed at one of these 3, 4, 5, 6 veto points, imagine 3 other ones over here that say the same thing, right? Everybody understand what I'm saying? Okay? Let's do this here. Okay? So we had these 3 veto points over here, and now we have these 3 veto points over here. We're not quite ready to talk about the Senate side yet, though. So, but just so that everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? What would you say that the probability is? What would you guess the probability is that a bill, any given bill, is going to be tabled by a full committee or a subcommittee, whether in the House or in the Senate? Just throw out a probability for me, like a percentage. Is it 50%? Is it greater than 50%? Is it less than 50%? Or do you want to take a guess at an exact percentage? Go ahead, Seal.
Less than 50%.
Less than 50%? Anybody want to say more than 50%? Okay, one person. Thomas wants to a couple of people out there. Okay, look at this. I may not have shared this with you last time. I don't remember me sharing this with you, so I'm going to share it with you now. Don't try to get all this down because it's not going to be on the screen long enough. And besides, the authors of your textbook have a really good discussion of the committee system. I don't think that I can add a whole lot to what the authors of your textbook have to say about the committee system. So I'm going to let you pick up the details there. But I do want you to focus on this one sentence right here. This sentence right here. It says, less than 10% of the more than 10,000 measures that are sent to committee are ever reported out to the floor. So their main job is to set priorities. So what's the answer to my question? First of all, is it more than 50% or less than 50%? It's more than 50%. In fact, you can do the simple arithmetic there, can't you, right, Thomas? What's the probability? At least 90%. You understand what I'm telling you? Is that at least 90% of bills that are introduced into Congress, okay, either beginning on the House side or the Senate side, at one of these points along the way, the full committee or the subcommittee, either on the House side or the Senate side, it's going to be killed. So the fact